Sweden here with NASCIO. We are glad that you are here. We have people joining us even as we have started this webinar, but we're very glad to show you this report that we've been working on and published. This webinar is essentially a retrospective on our recently published report that presents results, conclusions, and recommendations related to a research project conducted by NASCIO and Accenture on the current adoption and maturity of cloud services across the states and territories. So here is our agenda for this afternoon. And again, we are very glad you're here. We're going to give you an overview of the Accenture NASCIO Cloud Report. We're going to have some discussion. We have some questions for our guest panelist here, Todd Kimbrell. And then we're going to move into audience Q&A. And when we get to that part, we'll be looking for whatever you've put in the chat. So we ask you to use that. Julie will be checking that for us and sending those on to me. And then I'll ask those questions of Todd. So you know me, Eric Sweden with NASCIO. Todd Kimbrell is here. We're very glad to have him on this webinar. Todd was the former CIO for state of Texas and was the lead from Accenture on this project. Todd also facilitated 2 discovery sessions at the annual conference on this topic. And here's our cover. It's a great cover. It's really, in some ways, a continuation of our work from some years past with a series we titled Capitals in the Clouds. Thank you, Doug Robinson, for that title. Anyway, we kept that theme here, and we'll present some of the data from the report. But also we're going to present data we didn't put in the report. So this is a little kind of an add-on to our report. And but we did allude to some of these results in the report. But again, Todd, thank you for joining us this afternoon. We're really glad you're here.
Thank you, Eric. I'm glad to be here. It's my pleasure.
Here's the structure of the report. And you can download the report from our website, our resource center, and also up there we'll be putting the video some of you saw at the annual conference. We'll be putting this recording up there as well. So this is a recorded session and it will be available for your reference in future. So we're going to look at the current state of the industry in this report, key findings, and then pathways to progress, or what's the way forward. So Todd, just a question right at the outset, why this report and why now? Tell us a little bit about the motivation and intentions of this study, please.
Sure, thanks, Eric. So, I think in my former role, I certainly had the opportunity to spend a lot of effort and time invested in introducing cloud services to the state of Texas. But it seemed obvious to me that there was very little in the way of tooling that would, whether it's reports or case studies, it seemed like there was very little in the way of a comprehensive tool that state CIOs could use to really wrap their arms around what is going on with cloud, not only from as much from a market perspective as anything else. And so the intent was to come up with a tool that we would repeat every 2 years that would really empower the CIOs with a document or an artifact that they could use in working with their policymakers, that they could use in working with their leadership, that they could use in working with their customers to really understand and demonstrate to those people around the CIO organization and inform them about what is really happening out in the marketplace. Where is cloud moved? You can see that cloud has changed significantly over the last 10 years and will continue to do that. So I felt really strongly that it would be very valuable to all the state CIO organizations to have something that they could look upon, very much like the Verizon cybersecurity report that is produced every year, that people wait to get that produced. Very much looking forward to repeating the cycle and watching over time how a comprehensive recap of cloud for state government, how those needles move in every 2-year cycle. So that was the driver behind it.
Yeah, very good, Todd. Okay, as stated in the report under the current state of the industry, the number of companies offering software as a service, it grew from 450 in 2000 to over 15,000 in 2020. So what do you see, Todd, as the implications for state government regarding this proliferation of cloud offerings, particularly related to the text that reads "buyer beware"? What are your thoughts on that?
Yeah, so clearly to take a look at the marketplace, and we could clearly see that as in any other new technology, there's a hype cycle, and certainly the growth in the industry initially in terms of providers and the absolute historically that clear segregation of infrastructure as a service, separate and distinct from software as a service, separate and distinct from platform as a service. And looking backwards in time, we can see now that for those mega providers, those hyperscalers that are in that magic quadrant, you can see that their catalogs are now actually blurring those traditional siloed lines. So now you could go to a hyperscaler and you can get software as a service, you can get platform as a service, you can get infrastructure as a service. So today it looks like the marketplace has changed and moved in a different direction than that which it started to, 15 years ago, 20 years ago. And the issue about the underlying terms and conditions is really critical. I think when you look at the overall adoption by state government, it's still lagging relative to the commercial sector. And of course, in state government, there's a fiduciary responsibility that we all have to make sure that we are protecting taxpayer dollars when we get into these contracts. And there are some elements of contracting that are still pretty Wild West, right? Platform as a service in particular. And when you get farther away from the hyperscalers, you get more boutique offerings and capabilities. It really becomes critical that an organization that is procuring those services does make the investment of time to truly understand what does that underlying contractual obligation look like for the provider, because it can be vastly different, particularly in that platform as a service space where the definition of platform as a service is, frankly, it's kind of like miscellaneous as a service. Infrastructure as a service, software as a service, those are very clear. Terms and conditions have largely standardized and stabilized. Responsibilities of the client have become very clear. But when you get into platform as a service, it's sort of that gray area where there can still be some issues that procuring organizations need to be really keenly aware of before they sign a contract for some of those services. So that's really the point of that.
Very good. So, as we look at this work, it touches so many things. And just from your perspective, what do you see it as supporting, relating to considering how high cloud computing continues to rate on things like our state CIO top 10, what we learned from our annual surveys? We typically have a cloud section like we did in the 2021 survey. And the advent of CIO as broker, we certainly touched on that with our innovation report with you, and then our playbook for CIO as broker. What do you see as the relationships across some of this parallel work, Todd?
Yeah, so I mean, they all are related, right? I mean, the top 10, survey every year comes out, and it really does give our, the vendors in the marketplace a keen sense of what is the pulse of the CIO organization today and what are the priorities. You see the pandemic has actually forced a lot of organizations to make reactive movement to cloud services, which is not ideal. Ideally, you would want to be making these things, a decision to move to the cloud or incorporate some cloud services. You would want to make that more of a proactive and strategic decision. But unfortunately, the pandemic drove a lot of hands and forced a lot of people to adopt for the very reasons why cloud is attractive, should be attractive to all CIO organizations, because of the scalability, because of the elasticity, because of those service qualities that allowed a distributed workforce to work effectively from home on very short notice. So all of those sort of cloud delivery models and attributes were really keenly adopted by CIO organizations across the country, but done so in a very rapid fashion. And so I think for CIO organizations, they should right now be reevaluating their adoption of those services and really looking at what are the exercises that they need to do to fully maximize the value that they derive from those cloud services that they've incorporated in their technology portfolio. So the survey indicates the priorities for the CIO organization, and it aligns with the CIO as a broker model as well. When you look at the CIO as a broker, it conceptually is a movement from a traditional IT as a help desk providing organization to a, from a break fix model into really more partnering with the organization and delivering value from a service portfolio perspective as opposed to a break fix perspective. And the cloud offerings align extremely well with that CIO as a broker model and the playbook that NASCIO has been promoting for several years now.
We also see, there's an interesting dynamic here, Todd. I'm going to move to another slide here, one that comes from the report. And something that we learned, there's this emphasis seems to be on cloud smart versus cloud first. So you think we're maturing in our use of cloud where, we just don't presume cloud is necessarily the answer, but we're doing more evaluation of the appropriateness of cloud and which service model, as well as what deployment model should be used in circumstances. What do you think's happening there? Just a maturing of our knowledge of cloud, or what's going on?
Yeah, I mean, I think CIO organizations, clearly based on the results from the survey, do have their heads wrapped around what the cloud capabilities are. I think it was evident from the survey results that they're struggling with how to overcome some of the barriers that they see. But I think it's pretty clear, and I think this slide in particular, this question, I was actually quite surprised by this, that there are very few legislative or executive directives compelling the CIO organization to move towards the cloud or to adopt the cloud. Unlike the federal government with their cloud first in 2010 and then cloud smart in 2018. But I was surprised by this. And I think the takeaway for the CIO organizations is if you don't incorporate cloud in your modernization strategies and sort of move towards that CIO as a broker, you may find that there is a greater pressure from the marketplace to see policymakers get more involved in directing CIO organizations to incorporate faster, more. So I was really surprised by this slide. I know that in my experience in Texas, we had a lot of interest from just a few policymakers that were very keenly interested in technology. And it only takes one in the legislature to really drive through legislation that forces the hands of the CIO organization to move in a certain direction. That may or may not be favorable. Most policymakers don't necessarily have the technology understanding to craft a really solid piece of legislation that it supports the mission of the CIO organization, but doesn't tie their hands, because it's poorly worded, for example. So I was very surprised by this.
When we consider the level of adoption of cloud, however, here's a different perspective on this, Todd. The utility of cloud, I mean, is it become such an imperative that states are moving to cloud without a directive?
I think states are doing that. I think most states see the value of the cloud model and they're adopting it where it makes sense. I think generally I would characterize that the survey clearly showed that the risk appetite for the CIO organization is clearly that the cloud has a place. And that place is where it's appropriate to support migration or modernization of a particular workload. But it is not ever going to be the case where everything is going to move to the cloud. There does seem to be this view or point of view that there are certain workloads and or certain regulated data that the CIO organization does not see as a possible candidate to move into a cloud environment. It does look like SaaS is being more broadly adopted for sure. So software as a service does seem to be pretty widely understood and more easily consumed than some of the other models. And it does look like, from a cloud smart perspective, unlike the federal government, where their cloud smart directive was a result of the sprawl that result in the poor contracting that resulted from their cloud first initiative. I think the states generally are moving directly to a cloud smart strategy. And cloud smart, I think, for the state organizations is about making the right investments in cloud and going slowly and deliberately to make sure that there is not a a catastrophic event that prevents them from more broadly adopting cloud services.
Yeah, very good. This slide was an interesting one. This one is in the report. But as we look at this, you see how many different cloud providers exist in the states. And then you start to consider, how are you going to manage all of this? Were you surprised by these results, Todd?
I was very surprised by this. I think I'm not quite sure which state has 99, providers, but or which several states. I'm very surprised by that. I'm going to guess that maybe it's a non-cabinet government, a federated state that has a whole bunch, maybe 80, 90 agencies, and so each agency may have, a software as a service provider would be my guess. But I think I'm very surprised, given the deliberate and the risk aversion that most CIO organizations seem to have. I was very surprised by this high number. Even the mean at 22 seems high. Given that the overall adoption seems to still be relatively low when compared to another industry like a commercial industry where there's broad and rapid adoption of cloud services. So surprised about this, and I think it does open the door to the need of a cloud broker, and what does that cloud broker service look like? I think for a lot of states, one of the questions that I asked was about cloud services broker and whether there was deployment of that capability. And I think the response was also surprising, that there is more use of a cloud broker type feature functionality than I would have expected. So I think that's a good sign that the CIO organizations are embracing the marketplace, and those that have deep expertise in aggregating different cloud services and managing those cloud service environments. And I think this slide certainly points in that direction for sure.
Another aspect here, Todd, is how these cloud services, particularly you get further to the right there, how they have to be orchestrated, or possibly how they have to be orchestrated. So the importance of a cloud services portfolio, but the portfolio is not just what's there, it's how do they interact? Would you agree with that notion?
Yeah, I do. I mean, I think, I was in a conversation not too long ago about this sort of layering, if you will, of, if an organization, a cloud provider offers a service and a customer agency can go procure that service directly from that cloud provider, but the CIO organization doesn't allow that because they have their own sort of programmatic controls in place for how that service is consumed. And then they may have a multi-sourcing integrator layer or a cloud broker layer. And so when you look at these additional levels of control that exist between a service provider and a consumer, it adds cost. And that's the easy view. It looks like it becomes more expensive because the alternative is they could just go directly to the cloud service provider and get that same service. However, that's not the case operationally. Once you operationalize that, what doesn't happen if a customer agency goes directly to a cloud provider is you don't have the SLA reporting, you don't have the SLA management, you don't have the service desk integration, you don't have the billing and the metering, that feeds back into a single billing system. So where a CIO organization is offering those shared services, it becomes easier for the customer to have all of those services presented on a single bill with a single ITSM or a single help desk, with a single sort of process for submitting a ticket for support or automated provisioning and things of that nature. When you bypass all of those different sort of broker layers operationally, it becomes much more complex for the consuming agency to actually go, okay, well, which help desk was that? Oh, that's that ticket system. Oh no, wait, I need to do this ticket system, or who do I call for this? So, when you look at that brokering capability and that role of the CIO as a broker, that's the strength and the value, that it makes those easier for these cloud services to be consumed through a single mechanism.
So as we look at these different models for software service, infrastructure as a service, there's a complex cloud services, cloud provider portfolio that has emerged, as we've discussed. And we're looking at this data now regarding service models that make up these portfolios. Any surprise here? You'd mentioned certainly SaaS has gained more adoption than the others, but how would you comment on this, particularly looking at mainframe as a service at 4.2%?
Yeah, so actually I was surprised by that. I'm not surprised at all by software as a service being more popularly adopted. I think that's, again, goes back to the underlying T's and C's of that contracting, contracting for that type of service. It's very clear that liability and responsibility, where those lines are drawn. It's the consuming organizations are just using the tools that have been provided. So all the responsibility easily falls on the side of the provider. Infrastructure, I think, is also, a little surprised by that being that low. I would have thought it would have been a little bit higher. Platform as a service. So I think this is really intriguing because it shows how CIO organizations are moving more in the direction of procuring an outcome of a platform capability as opposed to doing it themselves. So as platform as a service grows over time, I think we'll see that continue to grow, because why rebuild the wheel if a cloud service provider has already solved a particular functional problem for a government organization and made that available to a number of states? So I think the platform as a service is going to continue to grow at a faster pace than the infrastructure as a service, as more and more organizations move towards that. I want to buy an outcome. I don't want to build it myself. So I think I was pretty excited to see that relative percentage of adoption. Mainframe, I think mainframe continues to be a huge challenge. It's the first man in, last man out syndrome when you're in a CapEx model of, you have to buy the equipment, you buy the infrastructure, you have to refresh it every couple of years. It's expensive. The software is expensive, and you have to take that sunk cost and divide it over the number of users. And so that makes it really, really challenging in that model to get off of that model. Now, there are a couple of different opportunities in the marketplace from a cloud perspective now that didn't exist 10 years ago that make that. And I think a lot of the vendors in this space are really starting to look at that and truly understand the challenge that a CIO organization has to transition out of that CapEx model into an OpEx model. And I know some states have done it, but I think that continues to be a huge opportunity for the marketplace to really find a more creative way to help the CIO organization come up with a manageable strategy that will help them migrate their customers off of that that technology. And I will say this about the technology: the technology is not old. It is not legacy technology. It's just expensive. It's you look at a brand new mainframe, and it is a highly engineered, highly performing platform. Some of the challenges which that marketplace is starting to address a little bit is more the front end of the mainframe and the applications and the workloads that they put on that, and how to migrate from the older code base into a newer code base that takes advantage of newer interfaces. Excuse me.
Something we've discussed in our report as well is we've seen a proliferation of cloud providers and cloud services in the marketplace. In parallel with that proliferation, what's the convergence that's happening? For instance, service models coming together, software, platform, infrastructure coming together. Has this been a bit haphazard, an accidental evolution, or has this been a deliberate, thoughtful strategy for state government movement into cloud services? Or maybe there's a combination of both of those. It's on purpose,
I think. Yeah, probably some of both. I think when you look at, again, the hyperscalers, where they've sort of taken acquired software capabilities and sort of incorporated them in their catalog of software services. So you look at a hyperscaler like an AWS or an Azure or Google, and their catalog of services now blur all these lines completely. And I think the interesting thing is, when one of the survey questions was, do you, for the CIO organization, do you see a hybrid solution where you're incorporating multiple cloud providers, or do you put all your eggs in one basket and go with a single contract with a single cloud provider? And clearly across the board, the resounding answer was no, we're going to do multiple cloud providers, and we're going to use a hybrid model to bring those capabilities in. And I thought that was really interesting because I had a conversation with with somebody who was saying, well, when you look at more the commercial side of things, they tend to pick one provider because truthfully, when you look at a capabilities perspective, the difference at that level between those hyperscalers from a functional perspective, those catalogs are actually pretty similar. You're going to find a little bit of difference here and there. Certainly from a technology perspective, there may be some differences. But overwhelmingly, in the commercial world now, a customer could just pick one cloud provider and sort of get everything they need from one cloud provider, one contract vehicle, and it's no longer the case where they have one SaaS provider or multiple SaaS providers, one IaaS provider and one PaaS provider. That's not going to happen in state government. And I think the reason why it's not going to happen is because despite the collapsing of everything down, again, for those hyperscalers, the reality is the CIO organization, by and large, has to deliver services to their customer agencies. Those customer agencies want choice. So there may be a customer agency that has, and I'm going to oversimplify this, that is, deep in the Microsoft technology stack. And there may be, and so they're going to have a preference, oversimplifying, but they'll probably have a preference for Azure. Whereas you get another agency that has a technology stack that may be Oracle, and they're really deep into Oracle products, and so they may have a preference for the Oracle cloud. And then another customer that may be really deep into, some open source products or other products that may lend themselves more to, the AWS world. So I think the likelihood that what's going on in the commercial sector with regard to this collapsing of capabilities and what's going to go on in terms of providing multiple providers in the public sector, though I don't think those two things are going to develop the same.
Yeah.
I think you'll see that the CIO organization is going to want to maintain that ability to provide choice to their customers through a hybrid.
And that leads us into this ongoing complexity. In other words, the complexity is not going to go away. So we see here from these results from the report, this proliferation of cloud services and the parallel complexity. We see some states, not all, but some have moved to employing a cloud broker. As you mentioned earlier in this webinar, should we expect more of that, more movement to that? And maybe, again, tying back to the CIO as broker, there has to be a specific discipline for managing this proliferation complexity.
Yeah, and I think so. And I think if you look at this result, it's not a surprise that software as a service and platform as a service are much higher in that broking capability, simply because it's easier to broker them. So when you think about software as a service, it doesn't have that, sort of metered aspect of elastic demand. It tends to be you pay so much per month and you consume that service. Sort of the same thing for platform as a service. But when you get into X and mainframe and infrastructure as a service, really that strength of that cloud delivery model, of that metered billing, is really strongly in effect. And so when you get into the brokered space, I mean, having done this, a couple of years ago, it's pretty complex about how do you take all of the service provisioning capabilities for those other cloud delivery models and work that through a broker to drive and interface in with the cloud service provider, as well as that billing feed to get that metered billing back into your ITSM and ITFM solutions that you're running for all of your customers. So I don't think these results surprise me a bit. I would expect to see it continue to grow, and I think you'll see it grow more in the infrastructure and the miscellaneous and the mainframe as a service as well.
Okay. Todd, states are telling us their desired end state for the majority, that is a hybrid cloud environment. Why hybrid? What is it that deployment model provides to states that they want?
Well, it's risk aversion. If you've got all your eggs in one basket and you got a problem, then you got a problem. But when you have the hybrid model, allows you to continue to maintain your on-premise or your private cloud environment and incorporate cloud providers into that environment in a sort of single virtual data center environment. It's ideally suited for the CIO organization because you have the best of both worlds. You can decide over time which workloads are best served out of which environment. When you get to the more complex IP topology architecture of creating a multi-tenant environment in a multiple cloud landing zones for for the CIO organization's customer agencies, to allow them the ability to decide when appropriate how to migrate workload from an on-prem or private cloud into the public cloud and vice versa. It also gives the advantage of time, right? So where you've got a budget cycle, it's very difficult to do a big bang and say, okay, I'm going to move everything to the cloud and I'm going to do it this budget cycle. Whereas the hybrid model allows you to sort of take maybe 20% of your infrastructure this budget cycle and move that through your hybrid, topology into your connected cloud environment. And so every year you have the advantage of making sort of this a roadmap and actually migrating stuff over time, as opposed to having that pressure of like ripping the Band-Aid off and a big IT drain the ocean project to try and move everything because you don't have them interconnected. So I think the hybrid is absolutely what we're going to see, and I think most states are going to end up in that with that type of a model as if they don't have it already, as they start to move down that path of building out their adoption strategies. I think we'll definitely see more and more hybrid.
So, as we look back over this past year, with the context of a pandemic that was global, those states that had scalability were better able to cope and deliver better. Do you think, can state government even function anymore without employing cloud service portfolios?
Sure. I don't think that cloud is a survival discussion. I think it's an optimization discussion. And for those organizations that are struggling with modernizing their current, technology stack, I think the cloud is absolutely should be considered as part of their modernization strategy. When you talk about, because of the scalability, the ability to what the pandemic taught us is surging constituent demand is a problem, and how do you deal with that? And the cloud service model makes that a non-issue. And so anybody that is not, and then you look at, I had a conversation yesterday with somebody who was talking about their tax system, and their on-prem legacy tax system had to be built to manage their peak demand, which happened once a quarter. And then the other 80 days of the quarter, it was largely sitting idle. And so you've got this tremendous capacity for a workload that has a very periodic demand or a surging demand. And so the cloud allows a CIO organization to optimize their costs and match the cost to the service, which the traditional kind of waterfall, SDLC, drain the ocean, large IT projects and on-prem just doesn't support.
We talked about workforce and some of the other barriers to cloud adoption. So we've learned a lot over the years regarding budget, cybersecurity, procurement, and workforce. But this issue was covered in the report under the section Current State of the Industry. So as we look at this, just curious to see, what your thoughts are. Why is budgeting such an issue for states?
Yeah, and I think that's the value of the cloud model is this metered billing capability and the ability to reserve. And that's a challenge where you've got a variable cost that is funded with a fixed budget. I think that's the area where a lot of CIO organizations struggle. I've got X amount of dollars per year, and it's fixed. It's a flat amount, and they have a hard time adjusting to seeing how can they control a cloud service that's inherently elastic, that is a pay-as-you-go model. And so, I mean, there absolutely are ways to do that, and I believe the cloud service providers are aligned with giving that type of, and certainly the SIs are aligned with coaching a CIO organization through the financial controls that need to be in place to manage that. But I think that's the reason that's so high. That it's that the challenge of moving from a fixed budget to an elastic cost. And cybersecurity, I was surprised by that being so high. I think it's pretty clear the market has done a good job of demonstrating that they are securing the infrastructure. I think when you look at infrastructure as a service, as we all know now, it is incumbent upon the customer to still secure their workload. But this question in particular, it does seem like organizations felt they had the right cyber skills, they had the right cyber tools in place. So it was interesting to see that this was a barrier. And I think, after talking to a few people, the reason why it's listed so high as a challenge is because the high risk of messing with your defense in depth. And so as you start to migrate workload to the cloud and you start to adopt different cloud security capabilities, the likelihood of disrupting your coat of many colors that you have in your on-prem environment as you move into that cloud environment creates risk that, okay, maybe you didn't think of something, or maybe as you transition into other cloud security capabilities, or you leave some other products behind, that there's risk associated with that. So I think that was really the driver there.
That's interesting. So as we look at this list, do you think we're making progress away from this budgeting, procurement, focused on capital investments? Do you think those functions are changing their business processes to accommodate more of the OpEx kind of a model?
Yeah, I think they're changing. I think they're heading in the right direction. I think the existence of this report, doing the survey, trying to pull together a more comprehensive view of how state government and local government, for that matter, can really start to adopt smart cloud strategies, right? About how to incorporate and realize what are the actions they have to go through to maximize the value that they can derive from the cloud delivery model. Another thing that surprised me a little bit on this was that procurement and legal were as low as they were. I think you talked to, and certainly from my experience working with procurement team and legal team, when we were 10 years ago trying to incorporate cloud contracting, and they just did not understand the difference in the delivery model and how that influenced the underlying T's and C's. And so I was actually surprised by this being as low, especially legal. So I think that's a positive sign that organizations have been having those cloud conversations, and they have been taking those cases where they've done a pilot or a proof of concept or a proof of value, and they've been able to work with their procurement and legal teams to get them on board with understanding you are not necessarily procuring or contracting for an outcome. Sometimes you're just procuring a service, and that looks different relative to the way people used to do it. So I was surprised by those being as low as they were.
Okay. Something we've talked about over the last half a dozen years or so is the changing skills. We look at Georgia as well as Texas, talked about how the skill portfolio has to change from the environment where you're building things to where you're buying things. As you look at this list, though, it appears we're catching up. In other words, look how many states believe they've got in place the cybersecurity skills, the vendor management skills, the operations management skills. So as you look at this, what do you think are the workforce issues then related to cloud adoption if we're doing this well?
Yeah, I mean, I think this is surprising that, again, I'll say that I would characterize that overall adoption of cloud at the highest level by state government is just going slow and steady. I think this question completely shows that CIO organizations feel like they do have the right skills, that they can support a cloud strategy. And I think the hard part is to effectively incorporate, and I think this lines up well with the CIO as a broker. That model, that playbook is the one that sort of really demonstrates how, whether it's cloud or whether it's a managed service, but that concept of outsource to your service needs to the best of breed partner that you can find, because that's what they do all day long, and they have the bench depth to do it. They have the resources to do it, whether it's a cloud or a managed service. That idea of doing it yourself, it's not an optimum strategy any longer. So I think this is really intriguing because it shows that across the board, CIOs are well positioned to go forward with, incorporating cloud and managed services in their overall service portfolio. I think the transformation that is not reflected in this question, and I think maybe we need to incorporate it in the next survey cycle, is really more about organizational change. And so whether IT has the skills and the capabilities to move forward with implementing cloud services and operationalizing cloud services and managing cloud services, the reality is to optimize that experience and get the most value out. It's your business units that need to actually change their way of thinking and adopt more agile approaches and work more interactively with the IT organization. But I think this is a huge sign that the IT organization itself is well positioned to see broader cloud adoption going forward.
Yeah, it appears so. So another question we could address here as we consider the complexity, we consider, all the things related to how cloud is affecting so much across state government, particularly the roles, responsibilities of our state employees. Effective governance becomes essential. So we see here a significant number of states have put in place governance for cloud acquisition, some operations. So what are the risks, Todd, related to not having in place effective governance, and what needs to be included in the scope of that governance?
So I was surprised by how much governance was in place, and it could be that the governance term may be loosely interpreted. I think for me, the concept of governance is really gets to one of controls and oversight, and I think largely from my perspective, it means including your customers in that governance process, right? So something that we adopted in Texas is the owner-operator model, where we brought the customers into the governance process. And so what you find when your customer agencies are involved in the strategic decision making and the strategic monitoring of a program within which they participate, it makes it really, really difficult for them to not be satisfied with the service that they're getting. That was the clear learning that we had, that when we were doing it, when we were delivering a service and the customers did not have a voice in the strategic outcome of that service, they were very dissatisfied. Once we brought them inside and made them part of the governance process, customer satisfaction really sort of soared through the roof. And I think this question is a little bit misleading, because I think it could imply sort of an internal IT only governance. It may include customers. It's difficult to tell from this, but I was surprised by how much governance was in place, but relieved, because I think, one of the challenges that we see generally across the country is for those organizations that don't have a governance, and they report pretty consistently that they are not seeing the benefits out of the cloud service delivery model that they originally anticipated. And an easy example of that is, billing. You turn the meter billing aspect. You turn all the lights on in your house. If you don't turn them off, you're going to have a big electric bill at the end of the month, and that's exactly what happens. So, the ability to say, we've got a resource, we're going to stand up, this capability in the cloud. We're going to run it Monday through Friday from 9 a.m. to 5 p.m. and then we turn it off the rest of the time. And that delivers some of the cost savings that you're expecting. Or you're going to turn off your development environment or your test environment when you're not doing a release cycle. And if you don't have the governance in place to go turn those off, you're never going to get the benefit that you're anticipating. So governance is really crucial to go in, with a well thought out governance plan that helps not only your operations, but manages your customer relationships as well, to make sure that they get the value out of the cloud that everybody expects.
Very good. Folks, put in your any questions you have in the chat. We'll try to get to as many of those as we can. But I want to, Todd, I want to do a little bit of a futuristic look here. Let's get into a time machine. Go out into the future, 10 years from now. And when we sit back and look at all of this, you know, all that we've been discussing and all that we are learning, what do you think we're going to observe? And what do you think our retrospective prognostication will be? You know, think about 10 years from now, Todd. What do you think is going to happen?
Yeah. Well, I mean, I think, you know, based on this, I think definitely looking forward to seeing this report over the next 2 or 3 cycles. I think it'd be really telling to see how the marketplace continues to move forward and how adoption, how that needle moves forward as well. I think one of the things that people have talked about that is maybe more an academic discussion, which I don't think we're ever going to see it, which is sort of the concept of portability of workload. Meaning, if I put my workload in one hyperscaler's environment, and then I want to recompete that price and be able to sort of seamlessly move it to another hyperscaler's environment, you know, and there's discussion that perhaps container strategy is the right way that you can accomplish that. I think the reality is that that is not value add for any of the cloud service providers. So I don't see that is ever going to become, nor even from a business perspective, do I see that sort of fungibility of cloud environments and the portability of your workload to move it to whatever cloud environment you want to on a moment's notice. I don't see that ever really coming about. I think that's something that looks good on paper, but in reality, the work that the service providers have to do and the work that the cost, I think, to create that type of a capability just isn't worth the effort, in my opinion. So I don't think we'll ever see that. I know it gets discussed a lot. I think we'll continue to see a consolidation. You know, I think you know, the hyperscalers are going to be around for a long time, I think, and the cloud service model is definitely as a service model is not going away. And I think it'd be really interesting to see over the next 10 years how well and how fast the states are able to move their organizational structure into a cloud operating model. And when you think about the cloud, I think also in the next 10 years, we're likely to see new language coming about. So for the past 15 years, people talk about the cloud, right? And they've used that term so broadly and so vaguely. It's like saying Coke, right? Well, do you want Coca-Cola? Do you want Pepsi-Cola? Do you want RC-Cola? People just say Coke. And so cloud has been that way where, you know, the traditional silos of the past have been very, very distinct. When you say cloud, it means something different if it's software as a service or infrastructure as a service or platform as a service. Going forward, I think we're going to see cloud as less of a description of the model and more about the internal operating model that a CIO organization moves to optimize their use of these externally provided services. So I think the concept of just simply saying I'm in the cloud or I'm going to the cloud, I think that's going to start to change a little bit, and it will become more inwardly focused on, you know, have you adopted a cloud operating model inside your organization that allows you to optimize sort of the CIO as a broker role, right? I mean, that allows you to optimize the external services that you're consuming for your customers or making available for your customers as they go through, you know, fulfilling their mission and enabling that as quickly as possible.
We're already
I also think we'll start to see a lot of with state ramp and you know and now Tex ramp and as ramp in Arizona. I think we might start to see some more really niche boutique providers that solve one particular problem, and they have no interest in doing it at the federal level. But now with the state certification, I think that creates an opportunity for a lot of boutique providers to come up with, you know, the best bread cutter in the world and only sell it in one state because that's where they want to do business. So I think I wouldn't be surprised if we start to see more of that type of activity as well.
We've already had some discussion on our Enterprise Architecture and Governance Forum about cloud and the term and better terms. So I'm interested to see if that actually happens. Here's a little more data. We've got a few more minutes here, so we'll cover a few more things here as we come to the end. I'm not seeing any questions come through. So what we see here on this slide this may be a bit surprising to our community. Only 57% have an application inventory. We would have thought we were further along than that. But what exactly is that impacting regarding cloud migration, Todd?
Yeah, I mean, I think these results are actually pretty disappointing, and it's hard. I know in Texas we did this in 2014. We got legacy legislation to actually do the first statewide inventory, and Texas is very federated, but we got authority to do a statewide inventory of all systems, and we ended up with 112,000 entries in the inventory, and which equated to, and we assessed the obsolescence of each application as well, each system. And we found that 60+% of the mission critical systems in Texas met a clinical term of obsolete. You know, and when you think of the technical debt associated with that, having that knowledge of the overall health of your portfolio of applications is extraordinarily powerful to be able to work with, you know, policymakers and seek funding to actually modernize and address that risk. It's the risk to the citizens that exists as a result of that. So I was really surprised that there was not more confirmation that that application inventories exist, and you really can't do the other two unless you have that first. So for sure, it makes sense that those are, you know, those are less. But you really, everything starts with that application inventory. You have to have that portfolio in order to do the application risk assessment and then the legacy application assessment. But that helps the CIO organization target what's the prioritized workload to consider modernizing, either to an outsourced partner or modernizing to the cloud. But nonetheless modernizing and trying to move away from underlying principle, right? Move away from CapEx and move it through that modernization, move it to an OpEx kind of financial world.
Right. And relative to that, you know, this was a very interesting result as well. From our report, we learned 89% of states have a documented procurement process for cloud. You know, so can we conclude state budget officers and offices have ways to go to evolve their approach to support and align with the advent of cloud services, and is there no way going, you know, are we going forward or backward?
It's definitely going forward. I'm not sure I believe this, but no, it's definitely moving forward. It's moving in the right direction. I think I think based on my own experience with a lot of procurement people, I'm not sure that this is absolutely the fact. I think what it may indicate is that there are a number of what I would call a backdrop contract now, where there's a master agreement that's in effect for adoption, certain, whether it's, you know, a DIR contract in Texas or whether it's a NASCIO, you know, cloud contract that multiple states have access to. There are cloud contracting vehicles that are out there that the procurement people tend to point to and go, okay, well, we can do that. But I think when you look at the real intrinsic understanding of the procurement people in any given state to really understand what does it mean to contract for cloud services, I think this is a little bit misleading. I think I think most of the vendor partners struggle with, you know, moving from sale to procure or from offer to procure, and have to work a lot trying to give guidance to the procurement people.
Okay, we'll put a little caution on this one then. Here's a question, Todd, from our participants here. How are states incorporating state ramp designations into their decision making? Do you have an answer for that, Todd? Do you know?
Yeah, so I mean, I think, you know, fortunately, most of the states have aligned with the FedRAMP, and the state ramp process now gives sort of what I would think of as reciprocity. So if an organization is FedRAMP certified, that organization can, and state ramp has already provided their first list, I think, maybe even their second list of those FedRAMP certified services that are being granted state ramp certification. It is incumbent upon the vendor to actually apply to state ramp to be included in that list, but they don't have to go through the full and complete certification process. When you get down into TexRAMP in Texas and ASRAMP in Arizona, then it can be a little bit different. They may or may not be granting that same reciprocity. But I don't know that states necessarily have specifically changed their certification preferences to state ramp over FedRAMP. I look because of that reciprocity. I mean, I don't see state ramp going away. I mean, I think it's a great idea, and it serves a purpose again for the vendor community, like an individual state certification process. The vendor community that wants to do state business but does not want to do federal business. You know, in my former role, I used to always say, you know, if you're a vendor and you have a lot of capabilities and skills of doing business at the federal level, but you haven't done it at the state level, I don't care. You know, the budget cycles are different, the lead times are different, the funding is different, and same thing for local government. I'm like, you know, state government, each level, each jurisdiction is different. There's different decision making, different procedures, different funding cycles. But nonetheless, I do think that that state ramp presents an opportunity for some vendors that may not want to play at the federal level, and I think that's good for states. And same thing, you know, again, individually for those states that adopt their own. I think given state ramp, there's probably not a compelling argument to have individual states develop their own. But hopefully those states, they will all grant, as did state ramp, they will all grant the vendors that have FedRAMP certification that same status in whatever their certification tiers are.
Yeah, they've already gone through quite a vetting process. We're at pretty much at the top of the hour, but I'm going to take one more question from our audience, Todd. Here it is. With consolidation on a few cloud providers, it seems like the cloud is a systemic risk like other utilities. Any thoughts on how to address this risk? And I think it's probably related to diversification, Todd. What do you think?
Yeah, so I think, you know, I'll reference a conversation I had with Nelson in Virginia, where, you know, he had concerns. He made the point, and it's a legitimate point, that while the cloud service providers have voluntarily chosen to be aligned with specific regulatory frameworks, there is nonetheless no regulatory oversight over the cloud sort of industry. And I think that there's something to that, right? I think the cloud providers, again, have voluntarily aligned with certain, you know, regulatory frameworks like CGIS or HIPAA or FERPA or, you know, IRS 1075. So they have all those capabilities. They get their SOC, you know, evals and audits every year. But there really is no kind of oversight. If you look at all the legislative activity going on now with, you know, Facebook and social media and the federal government sort of going, you know, maybe we do need to restrict what you can say and do, right? And whether it's Second Amendment rights or not, you know, who knows? So I think there is something to that. That's definitely something to be watchful of as the industry continues to consolidate.
We are at the top of the hour. Todd, thank you so very much for this very informative, insightful discussion of the report we did. And we want to point everyone to the Resource Center, but so glad you were here. And to our audience, thank you for joining us. Julie, for keeping us on track. And with that, we will close this session. Have a wonderful afternoon, everyone.
All right, thanks, everybody.